Now we are going to discuss about the last part. I'm just going to give you a really brief sense about, okay, if you're talking about emotions, we can still think about how neuroscience could inform us in terms of developing interventions, how we can be informed by neuroscience to develop different sort of interventions. Of course, you know that we are developing different sort of brain stimulation, different pharmacological interventions, but I'm going to mainly talk about the cognitive sort of interventions that you might be able to use for emotions. We have discussed before about having a sort of a model describing the temporal dynamics of emotional responses, whether it is just responding to a food cue or whether we are responding to an emotional cue that could be seeing a scene that makes us sad or being rejected in a group of people, all those kind of negatively balanced emotional stimuli. We respond with the process, and that process includes attentional processing, memory processing, saliency processing, interoception, control. All those parts are involved, and we know that we can develop interventions to intervene in the different steps of this, let's say, neurocognitive process inside the brain. We have discussed about this before. Let me just kind of get to another figure about that. So we discussed about what we call an emotional memory. So we know that we can get connected to different things or make different sort of emotional memories. And people realize that in the process of consolidation, there are definitely lots of chemicals involved. For example, we know that we have adrenergic responses. Let's say norepinephrine could be released when we do the process of consolidation for emotional memories. And people realize if we give people beta blockers, things like propranolol, when they are making emotional memories, propranolol could help them to just disrupt the serious, tightly wired consolidation for emotional memories. And people realize that if there are patients or there are subjects or there are participants who are exposed to, let's say, traumas, there might be potential that we can intervene rapidly and give them different sort of medications that might be able to help them to reduce the amount of the type of memories that they are making. So we can even do some interventions for uh, changing the process of consolidation of memories and helping people to have less significant emotional memories when it is needed. But meanwhile, we know that there are hopes that when we get those memories reactivated, there might be hope that we can also do the interventions in this process and what we call reconsolidation. So there are studies that people have used uh, noradrenergic blockers like propranolol, and they showed that we might be able to change the shape of the memories, emotional memories, and reconsolidate them into other shapes, and give people opportunities to make even other memories. So there are specific points of intervention in the memory, as we have been discussing about this, let's say, pipeline, and we have discussed about attention before. Memory could be another target. We could also have targets for other parts as well. So I will discuss about those parts as well. So as we discussed today, what we have in terms of the emotions, they are happening in subcortical areas. We know that subcortical areas are mainly generating the emotional experiences and emotional kind of, let's say, processing. And then we can have top-down control from what we call dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And we know that the top-down control is not probably the best way of controlling emotions because they have limited resources. We know that we cannot exert top-down control forever. It just could work for a short period of time. And then we have another level of processing, which is called appraisal and then reappraisal, which is mainly happening in what we call ACC. This one is happening in DLPFC, and this one is mainly in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And it is just reevaluating the emotional stimuli and seeing that from another perspective and trying to recapture the emotional experience. Let me just make you an example. For example, you are in a really crowded bus. You just see a dad with two boys. He's just coming up in the bus, and then the dad is just sitting in one of the seats without paying attention to kids, and kids are just screaming and playing inside the bus and annoying others and just kind of making lots of noise in the bus, and people are really upset about how the dad is not really taking care of kids in the right way. So you just, when you see this, let's say, scene, the first feeling that you will have, you just get into anger that why there are people who are so ignorant to just handle this their kids in a way that would not make trouble for others. But just few minutes after, the dad would just come to you and would sit beside you and would start talk with you and telling you that uh, his mom or uh, his kind of spouse or wife has died just few hours ago in the hospital, and he really doesn't know how to handle kids, and just he's just really uh, kind of desperate to be able to find a solution how to manage his life. So now when you see those kids that their mom is died, so or their mom died a few hours ago, then you would start to see that scene again and reappraise, and now you might start to have a compassion for those kids. The scene is the same, but the way that you are appraising the scene is different. And that is how appraisal is going to be important in terms of how we teach people to see different stimuli, different emotional stimuli in their life with another angle. And that is helping them in terms of controlling emotional experiences. And that is probably one of the most effective interventions in cognitive psychology that we use for different sorts of CBT based intervention. So that's another level of, let's say, changing that uh, salience in network processing, which is, as I told you, involved with dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And there are many studies showing that dorsal anterior cingulate cortex is involved in interventions that are kind of associated with different reappraisal strategies. And there are many details about reappraisal strategies. I'm not going to go to the details about that. But the other dimension of intervention in emotions, people realize that if you start to talk about your emotional experience, if you start to label your emotional experience with words and have different terms and try to express that with different kind of language processes, you would start to have better control on that. And that is quite an interesting experience in terms of why verbalizing something and finding a specific terms for those experiences or emotional experiences would help you to be able to control your emotion. That's another interesting experience. It's also interesting, as we have discussed about before, that language is highly related to what we call consciousness, and consciousness is highly related to what we call control, and so they are highly related to each other as well. And both of them are being processed in inferior frontal gyrus. So the level of control that we are talking about with language and consciousness is mainly an inferior frontal gyrus type of inhibition, not the top-down control that we have from DLPFC. So there are different variations of control that we have. And this is a totally different level of kind of control that we are talking about, different level of inhibition that we are talking about. So this is another, let's say, dimension of being able to be in control for emotion. And that, I mean, these different strategies could work together to be able to control emotions with different, let's say, combination of these strategies as we teach people and provide them with this sort of intervention. Meanwhile, we shouldn't forget the insular cortex and potential for emotional awareness using interoceptive processing. And people realize that is probably another dimension that could be added to what we call appraising, controlling, verbalizing, and interocepting, and all together would help us to be able to control emotions from a sort of top-down perspective. Okay, that is the end of the session today.